think you got the wrong car.
Aurora Vale had only 15 seconds to find the black Uber she'd ordered. She spotted the car and the driver in a suit, thought, how different, and got in. "Hi, thanks for waiting," she mumbled, collapsing from exhaustion onto the leather seat. The driver didn't correct the mistake, figured it was something the boss arranged. He also said nothing when the actual owner got into the car. Rocco Marchetti, the most feared mob boss in New York, expected to find business reports. Instead, he found a student sleeping like an angel, messy hair, book on her lap, soft breathing that made something dead inside him. Breathe again. He should wake her up and kick her out. Instead, he whispered to the driver, "Home, Ivan." And for the first time in years, he smiled. Hi everyone, I'm Lena, the author of this channel, and today I wanted to thank our members. Thank you so much for your support, guys. So if you want to be featured in the next video, answer me below. What do you like most about my stories? I'll be reading all the comments. Chapter 1, The Wrong Car.
I just need sleep.
When I woke up to go to my psychology classes, my eyes burned so badly I could barely keep my eyelids open. The neuropsychology books I carried in my backpack weighed like bricks on my back, and I was absolutely certain my feet were bleeding inside the old sneakers I wore for my double shifts at work. 8 hours serving coffee and sandwiches to grumpy people, followed by 4 hours of intense lectures on human behavior and personality disorders, weren't exactly the perfect recipe for a peaceful night. I saw the black car parked exactly where the app indicated. An elegant sedan with dark windows and shiny paint reflecting the city lights. The driver was wearing a suit, which seemed strange to me for a second, but honestly, I was too tired to question anything that wasn't the distance between me and my bed. I just wanted to get home, take a hot shower, and sleep for about 3 days straight, even knowing that in a few hours, the cycle would start, all over again. I opened the back door and threw myself onto the soft leather seat with a sigh of relief that came from the depths of my soul. The interior of the car smelled like expensive wood and some masculine cologne I couldn't identify, but that definitely wasn't the usual cheap air freshener smell of the Ubers I normally took. I vaguely thought that maybe it was a new car, or that the driver simply had higher standards than average. "Hi, thanks for waiting," I mumbled to the man in the suit in the front seat, without really looking at him, because my eyes were already closing on their own. He didn't answer, but I didn't care. Some drivers were like that, quiet and professional, and at that moment I was grateful for the lack of small talk. I rested my head against the seat, feeling the cold leather against my warm skin, and let my backpack slide from my shoulder to the car floor. The car didn't move. I waited a few seconds, but nothing happened. Maybe he was waiting for another passenger, I thought with my mind already foggy, or maybe he was checking the GPS. It didn't matter. I was so comfortable there, so absurdly comfortable after a whole day on my feet, that I couldn't muster enough energy to ask what was happening. My eyes closed completely, and I felt the world begin to grow distant, as if I were sinking into warm water. It was the last thing I remembered before blacking out completely. I don't know how much time passed. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Time had completely lost meaning in that state of semi-consciousness where I floated, between sleep and wakefulness, where nothing mattered anymore except the comfort of that leather seat, and the wonderful silence that enveloped the car. I should be worried, some rational part of my brain whispered quietly, but that voice was too far away to make a difference. The sound of a door opening made me stir slightly, but not enough to really wake me up. I heard footsteps, the sound of expensive shoes against the asphalt, and then the car swayed subtly when someone got into the back seat, next to me, right next to me. I should open my eyes, check who it was, but my body simply refused to obey. There was a silence, a long, heavy, different silence, as if the world had stopped spinning for a few seconds. I didn't know it, but at that exact moment, on the other side of my unconsciousness, a man who had never been caught off guard in his life was completely paralyzed. Rocco Marchetti, the boss of New York's most feared family, was looking at me as if he had seen a ghost or an angel. My hair was messy, falling over my face in a disorganized way. There was a psychology book on my lap, already half falling off. My breathing was soft, calm, completely trusting in a way it shouldn't be, considering I was sleeping in a complete stranger's car. But I didn't know that. All I knew was that I was finally resting, and that nothing else mattered. Even. The voice was deep, low, with an accent I couldn't identify in my semi-conscious state. There was something in it that sounded different, shaken. Why is there a woman sleeping in my car? Silence. A tense silence that even in my state of exhaustion I could sense. Sir. She got in and said thanks for waiting. I thought it was something you had arranged. A meeting, perhaps. The driver's voice, Ivan apparently, sounded nervous and cautious. as if he were walking on eggshells. More silence. I felt the weight of a gaze on me, intense and penetrating, but I couldn't gather the strength to react. My body was too heavy, my mind too distant, and honestly, that seat was too comfortable for me to care about whoever was looking at me. "She got into the wrong car," the deep voice finally said, and there was something in it I couldn't decipher. It wasn't exactly anger, but it wasn't indifference either. It was something different. Surprise, perhaps. Fascination. "And you just let her?" I thought, Ivan began, but was interrupted. "It doesn't matter." A long pause. "How long has she been sleeping?" "About 20 minutes, sir." I felt the air shift beside me, as if the person had leaned slightly in my direction, but without getting too close. There was a hesitation there, something careful and controlled, as if he were afraid of startling me or breaking something fragile. The cologne I had smelled before got stronger for a second, enveloping, a mixture of wood, spices, and something indefinable that made my heart race even while sleeping. "Miss," the voice was closer now, soft but firm, trying to reach me without touching me, gentle, in a way that contrasted with the authority it carried. "You're in the wrong car." I didn't react, not because I didn't want to, but because I simply couldn't. Exhaustion had dragged me to a very deep place, and the journey back to consciousness seemed too long, too tiring. I heard a low sound, almost like a muffled, incredulous laugh, as if he couldn't believe what was happening, or his own reaction to it. And then the silence returned, but it was different now. It was a silence full of decisions being made, of lines being crossed, of a man who rarely changed his plans doing exactly that. "Home, Ivan." "Sir?" The surprise in the driver's voice was evident. "And the young lady? Take her too. I can't leave her sleeping on the street. I'll wake her when we arrive." The car began to move, and the gentle sway of the movement lulled me even deeper into sleep. I should be terrified. Some distant voice in my head was screaming, but all I could feel was a strange sense of safety that made no sense. As if, somehow inexplicably, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The trip was long, or at least seemed long in my altered state of consciousness. I moved between sleep and semi-wakefulness, vaguely aware of the car turning, accelerating, stopping at lights, and always, there was that presence beside me, silent, still, but intensely present, as if watching over me, guarding me. At some point, my body simply gave in to gravity and exhaustion. I felt my head tilt to the side, seeking support, and it found something firm and warm, a shoulder. It wasn't the leather seat. It was definitely a human shoulder, broad and solid, covered in fabric that felt expensive to the touch. I should pull away, but instead I nestled closer, seeking the warmth and comfort that support point offered. I heard that sound again, a low laugh, almost inaudible, vibrating through the chest of the person beside me. It wasn't a laugh of mockery or irritation. It was something softer, more genuine, as if something unexpected had happened, and this person didn't quite know how to react, as if, perhaps, it had been a long time since anything had made them truly laugh. "Unbelievable," the voice murmured, so low I almost didn't hear it, but I did, and there was something in that tone, something that made my heart do a strange leap even in my semi-unconscious state. The car continued moving through the night, and I stayed there, sleeping on a complete stranger's shoulder, in a car that wasn't the one I had ordered, going to a place I didn't know. I should be terrified, but all I felt was a strange, deep peace, as if my subconscious knew something my conscious mind hadn't discovered yet, that my entire life had just changed, that I had gotten into the wrong car, and that, somehow impossibly to explain, it was exactly the right car. Destiny really puts us in unbelievable situations to make everything work out, doesn't it? Chapter 2. In the Stranger's Arms.
She's safe with me.
The first thing I registered was movement, a gentle, rhythmic sway, as if I were floating. It wasn't the sway of the car. It was something different, more human, more intimate. My body was suspended in the air, but there was something solid underneath me, holding me firmly. Arms. They were definitely arms. Someone was carrying me. My mind was still too foggy to fully process what that meant. Maybe it was a dream, I vaguely thought. One of those weird dreams you have when you're too exhausted. I dreamed stranger things after double shifts. Once I dreamed my neuropsychology professor was actually a giant cat teaching a class on Pavlovian conditioning. This wasn't that weird. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt like lead. I managed only a sliver, enough to see blurred lights above me, an immense, glittering chandelier that looked like something out of an old movie. The ceiling was high, with plaster details forming elaborate patterns. Definitely not the ceiling of my tiny apartment. With the water stain I always pretended looked like a cloud. I felt the broad chest I was resting against rise and fall with controlled, deep breathing. There was a scent there, the same wood and spice cologne I'd smelled in the car, but now it was closer, more intense, enveloping all my senses in a way that made my stomach do strange flips. My hands were resting against soft, expensive fabric, and beneath it I could feel solid, defined muscles. How brutamente desse tá me levando. The confusion spilled from my mouth before my brain could filter it, mixing Portuguese and thinking out loud in a completely incoherent way. My voice came out thick, slurred, still caught between sleep and wakefulness. The arms holding me tensed for a second, but didn't let me go. The movement stopped. I felt that the person carrying me had frozen completely, as if they hadn't expected me to wake up at that exact moment, or perhaps hadn't expected my first words to be so confused and random. That's when reality began to seep through the fog of sleep. Slowly, like ice water running down my spine, consciousness returned completely. This wasn't a dream. I was awake, very awake, and a complete stranger was carrying me in his arms through what looked like a mansion straight out of an Italian mob movie. My eyes flew open all at once, and panic exploded in my chest like fireworks. "Put me down!" I screamed, and started thrashing in his arms like my life depended on it. Because, well, maybe it did. My fists started pounding the broad chest I was resting against. My feet kicked at the air trying to find something solid, and my heart was beating so fast I was sure it would explode. "Put me down now! Who the hell do you think you are? Put me down! Stop moving before I drop you!" the deep voice ordered, and there was a note of amusement there that only made me more furious. How dare he find this funny? I was obviously being kidnapped, and he was entertaining himself with the situation like it was some kind of private joke. But my punches weren't doing absolutely anything. It was like trying to knock down a concrete wall with my fists. He didn't even seem to feel the blows, and his arms kept holding me with that irritating firmness that made it clear I wasn't going anywhere unless he decided to let me go. Let me go. Let me go now, or I swear I'll scream so loud the entire neighborhood will hear, I threatened, my voice rising an octave with the panic that was starting to take over me completely. "Be my guest. The nearest property is 3 kilometers from here," he responded with that irritating calm, and then finally, he set me down on the cold marble floor. My knees buckled when my feet touched the ground, still weak from exhaustion and the sudden fright, but I managed to stay upright. I took 3 quick steps backward, putting distance between us, and finally got a good look at the man who had carried me here, and my brain simply stopped working for a few seconds. He was tall, very tall. He must have been at least 6 inches taller than me, and I wasn't exactly short. Broad shoulders perfectly filled the dark suit he wore, a suit that was probably custom-made because it fit his body in a way that off-the-rack clothes simply can't. His hair was dark, impeccably cut, with a few strands falling slightly over his forehead in a way that seemed calculated to be casual, but had probably cost a fortune at some fancy salon. But it was his eyes that held me completely. They were dark, so dark they almost looked black under the soft light of the chandelier, and they observed me with an intensity that made something in my stomach tighten. There was something dangerous in that gaze, something predatory and controlled, like a big cat watching its prey but deciding not to attack yet. Just observe, study, wait. His jaw was strong, angular, covered by stubble that gave him a slightly careless air that contrasted with the impeccable elegance of the suit. His lips were slightly curved in something that could be a smile, or perhaps just amusement at my completely hysterical reaction. He was, objectively speaking, the most handsome man I'd ever seen in my life, and that made me even more terrified, because men this handsome were usually dangerous in ways that women like me didn't know how to handle. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice coming out weaker than I would have liked. "Where am I? What do you want from me?" He tilted his head slightly to the side, as if carefully considering how to respond. There was something calculated in every movement of his, each gesture measured and controlled in a way that normal people simply weren't. He moved like someone accustomed to having power, to being obeyed, to never being questioned. "You're in my home," he finally answered, his voice still carrying that accent I couldn't identify. "Italian, maybe? And as for what I want from you, the answer is nothing. Absolutely nothing. Then why did you bring me here?" I shot back, crossing my arms over my chest in a pathetic attempt to seem more confident than I actually felt. "Why were you carrying me around like I was a sack of potatoes?" His lips curved a bit more, and this time it was definitely a smile. A small smile, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and it did strange things to my nervous system that I definitely didn't want to analyze at that moment. "You got into my car by mistake," he explained, and his voice had that soft quality of someone talking to a frightened child or a wild animal, patient, careful. "You fell asleep immediately. I tried to wake you, but you were completely out. I didn't think it was safe to leave you sleeping on the street, so I brought you here. I was going to wake you and have someone take you home, but you woke up first." I processed this slowly, my brain still operating at reduced speed. Wrong car. I had gotten into the wrong car. The Uber I ordered was probably still there waiting, racking up cancellation fees while I slept like an idiot in a stranger's luxury car. "You didn't touch me?" I asked, my voice still loaded with suspicion. My eyes examined him, looking for signs of lies, using everything I'd learned in psychology classes about body language and micro-expressions. "No," he answered, and his eyes met mine with a sincerity that was impossible to fake. "I tried to wake you without touching you. You didn't wake up. The only time I touched you was now, to get you out of the car and carry you in here. And if I wanted to hurt you in any way, I would have already done it. I wouldn't need to bring you to my home, carry you to the living room, and have this conversation." His logic was solid. I had to admit. And something about the way he spoke, his posture, the way he looked directly into my eyes without looking away, told me he was telling the truth. Either he was an extremely convincing psychopath, or he really had no bad intentions. My instinct, trained by years studying human behavior, leaned toward the second option. That's when my stomach decided it was the perfect moment to growl. Loud, embarrassingly loud. The sound echoed through the enormous room like thunder, completely breaking the tension of the moment. I felt my face heat up immediately. Of course, my stomach had to growl right in the middle of a potentially dangerous situation, because 8 hours serving food without being able to eat anything except a stale sandwich on my break was exactly the perfect preparation for being kidnapped by an absurdly handsome stranger. His smile widened, and this time it was genuine. It wasn't condescending or mocking. It was just amused, as if he had just witnessed something unexpectedly charming and didn't quite know how to react. "You're hungry," he observed, and it wasn't a question. It was an obvious statement based on my stomach's loud protest. No, I'm fine," I lied automatically, because accepting food from strangers went against everything my mother had taught me when I was a child. It didn't matter that this particular stranger looked like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine and had a house that was probably worth more than everything I'd earned in my entire life. He raised an eyebrow, clearly not believing me one bit, and honestly, with my stomach growling like that, there was no way to maintain the lie convincingly. "My housekeeper cooks very well," he said, and there was something almost gentle in his voice now. "And I'm sure she prepared dinner. You can eat something before you leave if you want. Consider it a form of compensation for the inconvenience of waking up in a strange house being carried by a stranger." I should refuse. All logic, all common sense, every voice of reason in my head was screaming for me to politely decline and ask him to call a taxi to take me home. But there was another voice, quieter but insistent, whispering different things. Curiosity, hunger, and something else I didn't want to name. Something that had to do with the way he looked at me, as if I were an interesting puzzle he wanted to solve. "And then you'll take me home?" I asked, my voice still cautious, but already less afraid. "No tricks? No conditions?" "No tricks," he confirmed, placing a hand over his chest in a gesture that seemed almost chivalrous. "You eat, rest a bit if you want, and then I'll take you wherever you want to go. Or I'll have my driver take you, if you prefer." I bit my lower lip, weighing my options. Leaving now would be the sensible choice, the safe choice. But when was the last time I had made the sensible, safe choice? Besides, curiosity had always been my weakness. I studied psychology precisely because of that, because I wanted to understand people, understand what moved them, what made them tick. And this man was definitely an interesting case. "Okay," I heard my own voice saying before I could stop myself. "I accept, but only because I'm starving. And not because I trust you." His smile transformed into something broader, more genuine, and completely lit up his face in a way that made me forget to breathe for a second. "Fair enough," he replied, and made an elegant gesture with his hand indicating a door to the side. "The dining room is this way, and for the record, I don't expect you to trust me. Yet." That "yet" hung in the air between us, loaded with possibilities and unspoken promises. And as I followed him through the absurdly large house, with crystal chandeliers and artwork on the walls that were probably originals, I couldn't avoid the feeling that my life had just taken a completely unexpected turn. And the scariest part was that a part of me, that irrational and impulsive part I usually kept well locked away, was curious to see where this turn would take me. He opened the dining room door and gestured for me to enter first, and I couldn't help but notice how he seemed slightly surprised by his own gentleness, as if offering food and hospitality to a stranger was something completely out of character for him, as if he himself didn't understand why he was doing this. And as I entered that enormous dining room, with a table that could easily seat 20 people, a single question echoed in my mind. Who the hell was this man? Oh, Aurora is about to find out who this man really is, but will she be able to handle the shock of the revelation? Chapter 3. Dinner and Unexpected Shyness.
You are sitting beside me.
And you are refusing to answer.
The dining table was absurdly long, so long I could lie down on it, and there'd still be about 2 meters left on each side. Crystal chandeliers hung from the impossibly high ceiling, casting a soft golden light over everything, and the chairs were the kind of antique furniture you see in museums and are afraid to touch because it seems like it'll break if you breathe too hard. I felt completely out of place there, in my worn jeans and wrinkled cafeteria shirt, as if I'd accidentally wandered into a world that wasn't made for people like me. He pulled out a chair for me, and the gesture was so natural, so automatic, that it took me a second to realize what was happening. By the time I did, I was already seated, and he was settling into the chair next to mine, not at the head of the table as I'd expected. Close enough that I could feel the warmth emanating from him, so that wood and spice cologne enveloped my senses again. "She should be coming with the food," he said, and for the first time since I'd woken up, He seemed slightly uncomfortable, not nervous exactly, but as if he wasn't sure what to do with his hands, where to look, how to act. It was strange to see a man who radiated so much control and power seeming so human. I took advantage of the moment of silence to really observe him. It was a habit I'd developed in college, this need to study people, to read between the lines of what they said and did. He was sitting with perfect posture, but there was a tension in his shoulders that suggested that perfection was maintained through conscious effort. His fingers drummed lightly on the table, an almost imperceptible movement that betrayed internal agitation. A side door opened, and a woman in her mid-50s entered carrying an enormous tray. She had graying hair pulled back in a low bun and wore an impeccably clean apron over a simple dress, but it was her eyes that caught my attention when they landed on me, widening slightly before sliding to the man beside me with an expression I can only describe as absolute shock. "Señora Maria," he said, and there was a respectful tone in his voice that hadn't been there when he spoke to me. Sorry, I didn't get your name." "Aurora," I answered automatically, feeling my face heat up. "Aurora Valle." "Aurora," he repeated, and the way my name came out of that mouth, with that Italian accent emphasizing each syllable, did something strange to my nervous system. "She'll be dining with us tonight." Señora Maria nodded slowly, but her eyes kept going from me to him, as if she were witnessing something completely impossible. She began arranging plates in front of us with efficient movements, but I could see how much attention she was paying to every detail of the interaction between us, as if she were mentally cataloging everything for later analysis. The plate she placed in front of me was a work of art. Fresh pasta perfectly intertwined, tomato sauce that smelled of basil and garlic, and grated cheese on top that was still lightly steaming. My stomach growled again, this time in pure anticipation, and I had to restrain myself from attacking the food like a starving animal. "Buon appetito," Signora Maria said softly before withdrawing, but not before casting one more significant look at the man beside me, a look that clearly said something like, "We're going to talk about this later." I picked up my fork, but before I could take the first bite, I noticed something. He hadn't taken his phone out of his pocket. There was no phone on the table, no tablet, no electronic devices in sight. And when I looked at him, I saw that all his attention was focused on me, only on me, as if nothing else in the world existed at that moment. This was rare. In my experience, people were always half present, half looking at some screen, always dividing attention between reality and the digital world. But he was completely present, completely focused, in a way that was simultaneously flattering and slightly intimidating. I ate the first bite and almost moaned out loud. The food was absolutely divine, better than anything I'd ever eaten in expensive restaurants on the few occasions I'd been able to afford that luxury. The sauce was perfect, the pasta al dente exactly as it should be, and the cheese melted on my tongue in a way that should be illegal. "Is it good?" he asked, and there was a genuine note of curiosity in his voice. "It's incredible," I admitted, immediately taking another forkful. "Signora Maria is a kitchen goddess," he smiled, and it was that kind of small, satisfied smile of someone who had just received an indirect compliment, as if the pleasure I was feeling from the food somehow reflected on him too. We ate in silence for a few minutes, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was almost companionable, as if we didn't need to fill every second with empty words. But eventually, my curiosity won out, because it always did. "So," I began, wiping my mouth with the linen napkin that definitely cost more than my entire outfit, "do you make a habit of bringing strangers home for dinner, or am I a special case?" He laughed, a low, genuine laugh that completely transformed his face. The lines around his eyes deepened, and for a second he looked years younger, less burdened by whatever it was that weighed on his shoulders. "You're definitely a special case," he admitted, and there was a raw honesty in those words that caught me off guard. "This isn't something I do. Never have, actually." "Why me then?" I pressed, tilting my head to the side as I studied him. "Why not just wake me up and put me in a taxi?" He was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes fixed on mine, as if trying to find the right answer, or perhaps trying to decide how much of the truth he wanted to reveal. "I don't know," he finally said, and it sounded like a confession. "When I saw you sleeping in the car, I should have woken you immediately. It was the sensible thing to do, but you looked so at peace, so calm, and it's been a long time since I've seen anyone like that." There were layers in those words, layers that my psychology-trained mind desperately wanted to unwrap and analyze. But before I could ask more questions, he changed the subject. "And you, psychology student who works in a cafeteria and takes Uber late at night, tell me about Aurora Valle." And then I found myself talking about college, about how psychology had always fascinated me because I wanted to understand people, understand what made them tick. I talked about the job at the cafeteria, about how exhausting but necessary it was because scholarships don't pay rent. I talked about Bianca, my best friend who studied medicine, and who was probably already worried because I hadn't gotten home. And he listened, really listened. Not just waiting for his turn to talk, but genuinely interested in every word that came out of my mouth. He asked intelligent questions, made insightful observations, and the more we talked, the more I forgot where I was. who he was, how completely surreal this whole situation was. You avoid eye contact when you talk about family, I observed at some point, unable to help myself. It was a professional habit, analyzing body language. You always look away or change the subject quickly. That suggests there's some discomfort or pain associated with the topic. He froze with his fork halfway to his mouth, his eyes widening slightly with surprise. And then, slowly, that smile returned, but this time it was different. It was pure admiration. You really pay attention to everything, don't you? He said, lowering his fork. Most people don't notice these things. I'm a psychology student. I shrugged, but I felt my face heat up under the intensity of that gaze. Analyzing behavior is kind of my job, or will be when I graduate. Fascinating, he murmured, more to himself than to me. You're absolutely fascinating, Aurora Vale. The way he said my name, with that deep voice and that accent, made my stomach tie in knots. And suddenly the air between us seemed thicker, charged with an electricity I didn't quite know how to handle. We eventually finished eating, and Signora Maria returned to collect the plates. She looked at me with an expression that was almost maternal, protective, as if evaluating whether I was good enough to be sitting at that table. And then she looked at him, and the expression changed completely. It was astonishment, admiration, and something that seemed almost like hope. It was wonderful, Signora Maria, I said sincerely. Thank you, she nodded, a small smile touching her lips, and then left the room carrying the plates with her. The silence that followed was different. There was a tension in it now, a mutual awareness that this moment was coming to an end, that soon I would have to leave and return to my normal life, and he would return to his, and we'd probably never see each other again. And from the expression on his face, that slightly uncomfortable tension taking over his perfect posture, I could see he was thinking the same thing. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and for the first time since I'd met him, seemed genuinely at a loss for words. I should go home, I finally said, breaking the silence because someone had to. It's late, and Bianca has probably already called the police thinking I was kidnapped. Technically you were, he pointed out with a crooked smile. Just accidentally. I laughed, and the sound seemed to break some of the tension. He stood up, and I did the same, smoothing my jeans in a nervous gesture. Ivan can take you, he said, and there was something almost shy in the way he spoke now. Shy. This powerful, controlled man was shy. Wherever you want to go, I nodded, grabbing my backpack that had been carefully placed near the door. We walked together to the entrance, and the silence now was almost painful. I could feel that he wanted to say something, ask something, but the words just wouldn't come. The door opened, and Ivan was there waiting by the black car, the same car where it all began. I took a few more steps toward the exit, but then I turned to look at him one last time. Thank you, I said, and it was sincere, for not leaving me sleeping on the street, for feeding me, for everything. It was my pleasure, Aurora, he replied, and his hands were in his pockets now, his posture slightly tense. I hope that, if you ever, maybe we could, he stopped, clearly frustrated with himself for his inability to form a coherent sentence, and it was so unexpectedly adorable, so completely opposite to the image of absolute control he projected, that I couldn't help but smile. Good night, I said softly, sparing him the embarrassment of continuing to try. And then I turned and walked to the car, feeling the weight of that dark gaze on my back with every step. When I got in the car and Ivan started driving, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him still standing in the doorway, watching the car drive away. And even when we turned the corner and he disappeared from view, I couldn't get the image of him out of my head. That smile, those eyes, that unexpected shyness, everything about him captivated me. Chapter 4, Reunion at College.
Tell me the truth.
I wish I could.
3 days. Exactly 3 days had passed since that surreal night, and I still hadn't managed to get that man out of my head. 3 days of classes I barely paid attention to, of shifts at the cafeteria where I served coffee on autopilot, of sleepless nights thinking about those dark eyes and that unexpected shyness when he tried to ask me to stay or to come back, or whatever it was he wanted to ask and couldn't. I didn't even know his name. That's what irritated me the most. How had I spent hours talking to someone, analyzing every gesture, every expression, and completely forgotten to ask something as basic as their name? Ivan had taken me home that night, and I'd been so lost in my own thoughts that I didn't ask him either. Now that mysterious man existed in my mind only as him, a nameless presence that occupied far more space in my thoughts than it should. Earth to Aurora, Bianca's voice cut through the fog of my thoughts. Are you going to eat that toast, or just stare at it until it develops sentience? I blinked, returning to the present. We were sitting at the tiny table in our kitchen, which barely fit 2 chairs, and had a sink that dripped constantly no matter how many times we tried to fix it. My toast was cold in front of me, the butter I'd spread already solidified again into small yellowish lumps. Sorry, I mumbled, picking up the toast and taking a bite without really tasting it. My mind was already wandering again, going back to that enormous dining room, to the way he had looked at me as if I were the most interesting thing he'd ever seen. Bianca was watching me with that expression I knew very well. It was the, I know something's going on, and you're going to tell me now, or I'm going to torture you until you tell me expression. She crossed her arms on the table, leaning forward with her brown eyes shining with curiosity. Okay, that's it, she declared. You've been completely spaced out for 3 days. You haven't paid attention in any class. You burned at least 5 customers' coffee at work. And yesterday, you spent 15 minutes staring at the bathroom wall doing nothing. So spill. Who's the guy? I felt my face heat up immediately. It's not like that. Aurora Valle. I've known you since freshman year, she interrupted, pointing her index finger at me accusingly. I know when you're obsessed with something. And considering you never get like this because of studies or work, it can only be a guy. So, who is he? How did you meet? Is he hot? Why haven't you told me yet? I sighed, knowing there was no escape. Bianca was persistent when she wanted information, and she always wanted information. It was one of the things that made her an excellent medical student, but an absolutely impossible roommate to fool. Remember that night I got home really late? I began, turning my coffee mug between my hands. When I said I took the wrong Uber and ended up running late, I remember. You said it was a misunderstanding with the driver. Well, it wasn't exactly that. I took a deep breath and told the story. Well, part of it. The edited version where I got into the wrong car by mistake, fell asleep because I was exhausted, woke up in a huge house, and the owner of the house was kind enough to feed me before sending me home. I left out details like the fact that the house looked like a palace, that he had staff, that the simple act of him pulling out my chair had made my heart race in a completely irrational way. Bianca listened to me in silence, her eyes getting progressively wider with each sentence. When I finished, she was practically vibrating with excitement in her chair. This is literally a fairy tale story, she practically screamed, slapping her hands on the table. You got into the wrong car, met a mysterious prince, had dinner at his castle, and now you're completely in love. Aurora, this is perfect. I'm not in love, I protested, but even to me the denial sounded weak and unconvincing. I'm just curious. He's an interesting case from a psychological perspective. Bianca looked at me with that expression that clearly said, you're deluding yourself, but I'll let you believe that for now. Uh-huh. Interesting case? Sure. She took a sip of her coffee. And does this interesting case have a name? I don't know, I admitted, and the shame of it hit me again. I forgot to ask. And he didn't introduce himself. You spent hours talking to a guy and didn't find out his name? Bianca laughed. But it wasn't a mean laugh. It was that kind of laugh like, this is so typically you that I'm not even surprised. Aurora, only you. But look, if you're this obsessed, why don't you try to find him again? How? I don't know his name. I don't know where he works. I don't have his number. All I know is he lives in a huge mansion somewhere outside the city, and he has a driver named Ivan. You could have at least gotten his number, Bianca reasonably pointed out. I know, but I was so nervous and confused that I just left without thinking straight. I covered my face with my hands, feeling the frustration grow. I'll probably never see him again. It was just one weird night, a random encounter, and now it's over. Hey, Bianca reached for my hand across the table, squeezing gently. If it was meant to be, you'll meet again. The universe has strange ways of making these things happen. I wanted to believe her, but the rational part of my brain, the part that studied probabilities and statistics and experimental psychology, knew that the chances of finding that man again in a city of millions of people were practically zero. The college was particularly crowded that afternoon. It was Thursday, which meant Professor Esposito's lecture on forensic psychology, one of the department's most popular classes. I normally loved this class, the way the professor combined psychological theory with real criminal cases, but today I could barely concentrate. I was sitting on the front entrance steps, taking advantage of the 15 minutes before class started to review my notes, or at least pretending to review them, because actually I was just staring at the words without really processing them, my mind wandering to places it shouldn't. That's when I heard the voice. That voice. Aurora Valle. My heart literally stopped. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. I slowly raised my eyes from my notes, almost afraid I was imagining things, that my brain had finally succumbed to obsession and started creating auditory hallucinations. But no, he was there, standing on the sidewalk next to a black car I immediately recognized, wearing another impeccable suit, this time dark gray, his eyes protected by expensive sunglasses that hid that intense gaze I'd spent 3 days trying to forget. I stood up so fast that my notes fell to the ground, scattering across the steps. I didn't care. I couldn't care about anything except the fact that he was there, really there, in front of my college as if he'd stepped directly out of my thoughts. What? How? I started, but the words died in my throat. My brain simply wasn't working right. He slowly removed his sunglasses, folding them and placing them in his jacket pocket, and those dark eyes met mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. There was a small smile playing on his lips, that same smile I'd seen when he found my growling stomach amusing. I realized I made a terrible mistake that night, he said, walking toward me with that natural confidence that made people around us turn to look. I forgot to introduce myself properly. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could smell that cologne again, and extended his hand in a formal gesture that completely contrasted with the informality of our last interaction. Rocco Marchetti, he said, and his name sounded like both a promise and a warning. And you're Aurora Valle, psychology student who gets into the wrong cars and sleeps on strangers' shoulders. Just imagine, I learned his name at this point. I took his hand automatically, and the grip was firm, warm, sending small waves of electricity up my arm. How did you find me? Well, he released my hand, but his fingers lingered a second longer than necessary. You mentioned you studied psychology. There aren't that many psychology colleges in this area. Ivan made a few calls. I hope you don't find it too invasive. I should be worried about the fact that he tracked my location using resources I didn't even want to imagine, but all I could feel was a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and a completely irrational joy at seeing him again. It's a bit invasive, I admitted, but there was a smile on my lips I couldn't control. But considering I spent the last 3 days obsessively trying to figure out your name, I think I can forgive it. His eyes lit up at that, and the smile widened. Obsessively? I felt my face catch fire. I mean, curious. Professionally curious. From a psychological perspective. Of course, he agreed, but his tone suggested he didn't believe me one bit. Psychological. There was a moment of silence where we just looked at each other, and I was hyper-aware of every detail. The way the afternoon sun caught the dark strands of his hair, the strong line of his jaw, the small wrinkles around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his serious expression usually indicated, and the way he looked at me, as if trying to memorize every detail of my face. So, he finally said, breaking the silence, "Want to get into the wrong car again?" I laughed, surprised by the joke. "Is that your way of inviting me to something?" "Dinner," he clarified, and for the first time since he'd appeared, he seemed slightly nervous. "I wanted to invite you to dinner, for real this time, not as an accidental consequence of you sleeping in my car." My heart was beating so fast I was sure he could hear it. I should say no. I should be sensible, cautious, remember that I barely knew this man, that he had enough resources to track me down to my college, that there was something dangerous and mysterious about him that my self-preservation instinct was screaming at me to question. But another part of me, the impulsive and curious part that always got me into trouble, desperately wanted to say yes. "I have class now," I managed to say, pointing vaguely at the building behind me. "Forensic psychology with Professor Esposito. It's important. I can't miss it." "What time does it end?" 6:30. "Perfect. Can I pick you up at 7? I bit my lower lip, weighing my options. The voice of reason was getting quieter and quieter, muffled by the pure excitement of seeing him again, of having the chance to understand who this man was who had occupied all my thoughts for the last 3 days. "Okay," I heard my own voice saying. 7 o'clock. The smile that lit up his face was absolutely devastating. It was genuine, happy, without any trace of that careful control he usually maintained, and it made something in my chest tighten in a way I wasn't prepared to analyze. "Until 7 then, Aurora," he said, my name sounding like a caress in that deep voice. He put his sunglasses back on, gave me one last look that promised things I couldn't name, and walked back to the car. I watched him get in, watched Ivan wave slightly at me from the driver's seat, watched the car disappear into the busy street, and only then did I realize I'd completely forgotten to breathe during the entire interaction. "Aurora?" Professor Esposito's voice made me jump. I turned and found him standing on the steps, looking at me with a strange expression on his face. He was a man in his 50s, graying hair, and a posture that suggested years of working heavy criminal cases. "Professor," I greeted, trying to regain some composure. "I was just heading to class." "Who was that man?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that made me pause. It wasn't casual curiosity. It was something more serious, more concerned. "A friend," I answered, not really knowing how to describe Rocco. "Rocco Marchetti. Why?" Professor Esposito was silent for a long moment, his eyes still fixed on the spot where the car had disappeared. When he finally looked at me, there was a tension in his expression that hadn't been there before. "Just be careful, Aurora," he said softly. "Some friends come with complications you may not be prepared to handle." And then he entered the building, leaving me standing there on the steps, my heart still racing from the encounter with Rocco, but now with a seed of doubt planted in my mind. Who exactly was Rocco Marchetti, and what did Professor Esposito know about him that I didn't? Chapter 5.
I was raised this way.
And real connection. At 7 o'clock sharp, Rocco was standing in front of the college building, leaning against the black car with a relaxed posture that contrasted with the formality of the navy blue suit he wore. When he saw me coming down the stairs, he smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made my stomach flip and my breath catch. I had run home after class, completely ignored Professor Esposito's curious looks that seemed to carry unspoken warnings, and changed in record time. Bianca had practically thrown me in the shower and chosen my dress, a simple navy blue one she swore matched my eyes, while excitedly yelling about how this was absolutely a fairy tale date. Punctual, Rocco observed as I approached, and opened the back door of the car for me. I like that. Psychology student, I replied, trying to sound casual even with my heart beating irregularly. We learned that punctuality says a lot about respect and consideration. Analyst even when you're not working, he murmured, but there was amusement in his voice. He got in the car after me, and this time sat deliberately close enough that I could feel the warmth emanating from him, so that familiar cologne completely enveloped my senses. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place I expected someone like Rocco to frequent. Discreet on the outside, with just a small gold sign on the door, but absolutely stunning inside. Soft lighting, tables spaced far enough apart to ensure privacy, waiters who moved with a silent efficiency that suggested years of training. The kind of place where you needed to make reservations months in advance, and where the menu prices made you swallow hard. We were led to a corner table, even more private than the others, and I couldn't help but notice how the maitre d' greeted Rocco by name, how the waiters seemed to know him, how everything flowed around us with an ease that only comes from familiarity, and probably a lot of money. "Do you come here often?" I asked, as soon as we sat down, picking up the menu and trying not to show my shock when I saw there were no prices listed. It was never a good sign when prices weren't on the menu. "Occasionally," he replied, but the way the maitre d' had reacted suggested that occasionally was an understatement. "For business meetings mainly, but never for this." "This?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Dinner with someone because I really want to be here," he clarified, and the raw honesty in those words caught me off guard. "Not out of obligation, not for strategy, just because I want to get to know you better." I felt my face heat up and looked away at the menu, pretending to study it intensely, even without understanding half the dishes listed in French and Italian. Dinner was served in stages, each course more elaborate than the last, and at some point I simply stopped trying to understand what I was eating and allowed myself just to appreciate it. But the food, as incredible as it was secondary. What really mattered were the conversations. We talked for hours that felt like minutes, that flew by while I got lost in his dark eyes, in the way his voice rose slightly when he talked about something that really mattered, in the careful pauses when he chose his words. "Do you analyze everyone like this, or just me?" he asked at some point, picking up his wine glass and watching me over the rim with that penetrating gaze. "You're a particularly interesting case," I admitted, leaning slightly forward. "Most people are easy to read. You're layers upon layers of careful control, as if you're always hiding something important." He was silent for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass, his eyes fixed on the red liquid as if searching for answers there. When he finally looked at me again, there was something vulnerable in that expression that hadn't been there before. "My family is complicated," he said slowly, each word chosen carefully. "Complicated business, complicated expectations, complicated relationships. I grew up learning that showing too much of yourself is a weakness, that control is survival, but control is also loneliness." I observed softly. "When you never let anyone see who you really are, you're alone even when you're surrounded by people." His eyes widened slightly, genuine surprise crossing his features. "How did you—" "Yes, exactly that. You deflect when you talk about family," I continued, unable to stop the analysis now that I'd started. "You get tense, choose vague words, change the subject quickly. It suggests trauma, loss, or at least unresolved conflict. And you compensate with excessive control in other areas of your life. You're reading my soul here, Aurora," he said, but there was no irritation in his voice. It was pure admiration, mixed with something that seemed almost like relief, as if finally someone saw him for real, and it was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. "It's what I do," I shrugged, but my heart was racing. "Or at least it's what I'm going to do when I graduate. Help people understand themselves. And you?" He leaned forward too, now so close I could see the small golden flecks in his dark eyes. "Who is Aurora Valle when she's not analyzing others? What are your dreams, your struggles?" And then it was me who was opening up. I talked about my mother, who had died when I was 16, leaving debts I was still paying. About my father, who had disappeared long before that, a ghost presence I barely remembered. About how I worked double shifts to pay for college, because education was the only way to break the cycle of poverty that had defined my family for generations. About the constant fear of not being good enough, of failing, of wasting the opportunity that so many sacrifices had given me. Rocco listened to everything without interrupting, his eyes never leaving mine, and when I finished, there was something in his expression that made my chest tighten. It was respect, admiration, and something deeper I couldn't name. "You're extraordinary," he said simply, and it sounded like an absolute truth, not like empty flattery. Dinner eventually ended, and when the waiter brought the check, Rocco grabbed it before I could even look. "I can pay my share," I protested automatically, even knowing my bank account would cry if I actually tried to pay half of that dinner. "I know you can," he replied, putting his credit card back in his wallet. "But I invited you, and I want to do this. Let me take care of this, Aurora. Let me take care of you. At least for tonight." The way he said it, the sincerity in those words, made any protest die in my throat. I accepted not because I needed to, but because I understood that for him, this was important. It was his way of showing affection, care, attention. "Thank you," I murmured, and he smiled as if I'd just given him a gift. The ride back was silent, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was that kind of companionable silence, where you don't need to fill every second with words, because the simple presence of the other is already enough. Rocco had asked Ivan to give us privacy, so we were sitting in the back seat, close but not touching, just existing in the same space. When we arrived in front of my building, Rocco made no move to let me out immediately. Instead, he turned to me, his whole body oriented in my direction. "I don't want this night to end," he admitted, and the vulnerability in that confession made my heart leap. "Me neither," I answered honestly. We stayed there talking for hours, about everything and nothing, about books we loved, movies we hated, places we wanted to visit, about philosophy, psychology, about human nature, and why people make the choices they make. He was intelligent, perceptive, and had strong opinions that challenged mine in ways that made me think. At some point, a strand of hair fell over my face. Before I could brush it away, I felt his fingers, warm and careful, moving the strand aside and tucking it behind my ear. The touch was gentle, tender, but sent waves of electricity through my skin. Our eyes met, and the air between us changed completely. It became thicker, charged with a tension that was part attraction, part inevitability. His hand remained on my face, his thumb tracing a soft line along my cheek, and I leaned into the touch without even realizing it. "Aurora," he whispered, my name sounding like a prayer, like a request for permission. "Yes?" My voice came out hoarse, low, loaded with everything I was feeling but couldn't name. "Can I see you tomorrow?" The question was simple, direct, but carried weight. It wasn't just about tomorrow. It was about allowing this, whatever this was, to continue. It was about opening doors that once opened couldn't be easily closed. "Yes," I answered without hesitation, and it was the first time I'd been so direct, so certain about something involving my heart. The smile that lit up his face could have powered the entire city with the pure energy it emanated. He leaned in, and for a second, I thought he was going to kiss me, but instead, he pressed his lips softly against my forehead, a gesture so tender and unexpected that I felt tears prick my eyes. "Good night, Aurora," he murmured against my skin. "Good night, Rocco." I got out of the car in a semi-trance state, floating toward the building. When I turned to look back, he was still there, watching me through the window with an expression that made my heart melt completely. It was only when I got to the apartment door that I saw the curtain moving in the window. The door opened before I could put the key in the lock, and Bianca was there, her eyes shining with pure excitement. "Girl!" she practically screamed, pulling me inside. "You're in love! I saw everything from the window. The way he looked at you, the way he touched your face. Aurora, you're completely, irrevocably, hopelessly in love." And for the first time, I couldn't deny it, because she was right. Chapter 6.
I need time.
I need time.
The following days became a blurred sequence of encounters that seemed straight out of a dream. Coffee in the morning before my classes, where Rocco showed up with fresh croissants from a French bakery I didn't even know existed in the city. Afternoon walks through the park when I had a break from work, where we talked about philosophy, and he attentively listened to my crazy theories about human behavior. Movies at night, where he rented out the entire theater just for the two of us, because this way you can comment on the film without annoying anyone, and I laughed at the absurd extravagance of it all. Bianca was in absolute ecstasy, living vicariously through my dates, and demanding detailed reports every night. I tried to maintain some objectivity, some psychological distance, but the truth was I was falling fast and without any safety net. It was Friday when Rocco picked me up at college with a different proposal. "I thought I'd cook for you today," he said, leaning against the car with that relaxed posture I'd learned to recognize as his version of disguised nervousness. "At my place. If you want, of course. No pressure." My heart immediately raced. Going to his house again, but this time not as an accident, not as a consequence of strange circumstances, but as a deliberate and conscious choice. A choice that carried implications I wasn't completely ready to analyze. "You cook?" I asked, buying time while my brain processed the offer. "I have some skills," he replied with a small smile. "Nothing compared to Signora Maria, but I can make something edible. The way he said it, with that smooth confidence mixed with a hint of uncertainty, as if he really cared about my answer, made my decision for me. Okay, I agreed, and the smile that lit up his face was worth any hesitation I'd felt. His house was exactly as I remembered. Imposing, luxurious, full of expensive details that screamed money and power. But this time, as Ivan drove through the enormous gates and up the circular driveway, I didn't feel the shock of the first time. I felt only a deep curiosity about the man who lived there, about the dissonance between the ostentatious environment and the gentle man who brushed hair from my face with careful fingers. "How many cars do you have?" I asked when we passed a garage where I could see at least 6 different vehicles, all obviously expensive and impeccably maintained. Rocco laughed. That low laugh I'd learned to love. "A few, for different occasions." "Different occasions," I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "Most people have 1 car, maybe 2 if they're really lucky." "And how many books do you have?" he countered, arching an eyebrow in amusement. I stopped, considering. My tiny apartment was practically sinking under the weight of books I'd accumulated over the years. Psychology books, novels, biographies, philosophy, stacked on every available surface because I didn't have money for proper bookshelves. "Touché," I admitted with a smile. "Everyone has their extravagances." "Exactly. I have cars, you have books. We're not so different." But we were. Obviously we were. His few cars were probably worth more than everything I'd earn in my entire life. But the way he said it, as if he really believed our differences were superficial, made something in my chest tighten. The mansion's kitchen was the size of my entire apartment. Stainless steel appliances that looked like they came out of a design magazine, marble countertops that probably cost more than 4 years of my college tuition, and a center island where Rocco had already started arranging ingredients. "You're really going to cook," I observed, still half incredulous as he removed his jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt, revealing muscular forearms that made my mouth go dry. I promised, didn't I? He started chopping onions with a skill that suggested much more than casual kitchen knowledge. The movements were precise, practiced, almost meditative. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" I asked, leaning against the counter to watch him work. His movements hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but I noticed. I always noticed. "My mother," he said softly, his eyes fixed on the onions he was cutting. "She insisted that all her children should know how to cook, regardless of gender or position. She said that food was love, and that we needed to know how to show love even when words failed. She sounds like she was an incredible woman." She was. His voice got even lower, loaded with an old but still present pain. "She died when I was 19. Cancer. Fast and cruel." My hand found his automatically, squeezing gently. "I'm sorry." He turned his palm up, intertwining our fingers. "Thank you. She would have liked you, you know. She would have loved how you're not intimidated by anything, how you question everything, how you're not easily impressed by superficial things." "I'm impressed by onion chopping skills," I joked, trying to lighten the weight of the moment. "Does that count as superficial?" He laughed, and the sadness in his eyes dissipated a bit. "Totally superficial, but I'll take the compliment anyway." We cooked together, or rather, he cooked while I watched him, and occasionally passed ingredients when requested. There was something deeply intimate about it, in the simple act of being in his kitchen, watching him create something with his own hands, listening to him tell stories about his mother, and how she had filled that huge house with love despite all the coldness that surrounded it. Dinner was perfect. Fresh pasta he'd made from scratch, sauce that smelled of basil and ripe tomatoes, and a simplicity in the presentation that contrasted beautifully with the elaborate dinners at the expensive restaurants we'd been frequenting. We ate in the kitchen, not in the formal dining room, sitting side by side at the center island with wine glasses and conversations that flowed as naturally as breathing. And at some point between dessert and the second glass of wine, I realized I had stopped trying to analyze what was happening. I had stopped questioning, maintaining professional distance, protecting my heart. I was just feeling. When we finished, Rocco took my hand and guided me out of the kitchen, up a wide marble staircase I hadn't seen the first time. My heart was beating irregularly, aware of where this was leading, aware that I was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Aurora," he stopped in front of a door, turning to face me. His eyes were dark, intense, but there was an unspoken question there, an offer to back away if I wanted to. "If you don't want," I placed my finger on his lips, silencing the words. "I want to," I whispered, and it was the purest truth I'd ever spoken. The room was large, dominated by an enormous bed and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the illuminated city below. But I barely registered the details, because Rocco was pulling me closer, his hands firm on my waist, his face close enough that I could count each dark eyelash. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, and the reverence in those words made my chest tighten. "So incredibly beautiful that sometimes I forget to breathe when I look at you." And then he kissed me, and the entire world disappeared. The kiss was soft at first, exploratory, as if he were savoring every second. But when I sighed against his lips, something changed. It became deeper, more urgent, hands moving, clothes being discarded with a mixture of haste and reverence. He was gentle, so gentle it almost hurt. Each touch was a question, each movement an offer to go slower if I needed. But I didn't want slow. I wanted everything, wanted to feel everything, wanted to lose myself completely in that moment, and in that man. When we finally joined, when our bodies fit together perfectly like pieces of a puzzle I didn't know was incomplete, tears rolled down my face without permission. Aurora? Rocco froze immediately, concern crossing his features. Did I hurt you? No, I managed to say, pulling him closer. It didn't hurt. It's just that I've never felt this before. Never felt anything even close to this. His eyes widened, and then he was kissing the tears from my face, murmuring words in Italian I didn't understand, but that sounded like promises and declarations. Me neither, he confessed against my skin. Never like this. Never you. And then there were no more words, just sensations, just the deep and overwhelming connection that consumed us completely. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the enormous curtains, warming my bare skin. It took a few seconds to remember where I was, to process the weight of Rocco's arm around my waist, the way my body was perfectly nestled against his. I turned carefully, not wanting to wake him, and just watched. He looked younger sleeping, the tension lines that usually marked his face softened by sleep, dark hair messy in a way that made my fingers tingle with the urge to touch it. Analyzing me again, the husky voice made my eyes jump to his, which were open, and watching me with a mixture of amusement and tenderness. Always, I admitted without shame. You're my favorite case study, he laughed, pulling me closer and pressing a kiss to my forehead. Coffee would be perfect. We had coffee together in the kitchen, wearing only robes he'd found, and there was a domesticity to it that made my chest ache in a good way, as if this were normal, as if waking up together and having coffee was something we did every day. That's when his phone rang. He frowned when he saw the screen, a shadow crossing his face. I need to take this, he said, and there was reluctance in his voice. Work. That's okay, I replied, even feeling a pang of curiosity about what kind of work required attention at 7 in the morning on a Saturday, but I didn't ask. Not yet. Chapter 7.
Why are they watching?
2 weeks. 2 weeks of pure happiness I didn't even know was possible to feel. 2 weeks where the world seemed to have brighter colors, where the air tasted different, where each morning I woke up to messages from Rocco wishing me good morning, and each night I fell asleep to the sound of his voice on the phone. I was in love, completely, irrevocably, dangerously in love, and the scariest part was that I didn't care. I'd let all my psychological defenses fall, had ignored every warning sign my training should have taught me to recognize, and had dove headfirst into that overwhelming feeling. Bianca was in ecstasy, planning our imaginary wedding, and choosing names for our hypothetical children. I laughed at her fantasies, but secretly, in some hidden corner of my heart, I dreamed too. I dreamed of a future where this wasn't temporary, where Rocco wasn't just a magical interlude in my ordinary life, but something permanent and real. It was on a Tuesday that everything fell apart. I was leaving the college library, my arms loaded with books on personality disorders for a paper I needed to submit the following week, when I felt a firm hand on my shoulder. I turned and found Professor Esposito, and the expression on his face made my stomach sink immediately. Aurora, I need to talk to you, he said, and it wasn't a request. It was practically an order, loaded with an urgency that made me instantly nervous. Now, in my office. Professor, I have class in 15, I began, but he interrupted me with a sharp gesture of his hand. This is more important. Trust me. Something in his tone, in the way his eyes avoided mine, made my heart start beating faster. I followed him down the hall to his office, a small room crammed with books on criminology, forensic psychology, serial killer case studies, and criminal profiles. The door closed behind us with a final click that sounded like a sentence. Sit down, he indicated the chair in front of his desk, and there was something heavy in his expression that made my skin tingle with apprehension. I sat down slowly, placing the books on the floor beside me. My hands were sweaty, my heart beating irregularly, and I had no idea why. I just knew something was wrong. Very wrong. Professor Esposito opened a drawer and pulled out a manila folder, placing it on the desk between us. His fingers drummed on the surface for a moment, as if gathering courage, and then he opened it. Do you recognize this man? He asked, turning the folder so I could see. It was a newspaper photo. Rocco, wearing a dark suit, leaving a courthouse. The headline above the photo said something about charges being dropped due to lack of evidence, but I could barely focus on the words because I was too busy trying to understand why Professor Esposito had a photo of Rocco. Yes, that's Rocco, I answered slowly, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Why do you have a photo of him? Rocco Marchetti, Professor Esposito said, and there was a weight in that name that hadn't been there when Rocco had introduced himself to me. Do you know who he is, Aurora? Aurora, really? He works with family business, I replied, and the words sounded weak even to me. I'd asked so little about his work, so little about his life beyond what we shared. I'd been so lost in the bubble of our connection that I hadn't questioned, hadn't investigated, hadn't done any of the things a good psychology student should do. Professor Esposito pulled out another photo. This was surveillance footage, grainy and in black and white. Rocco entering a building that looked like a nightclub. The date in the corner suggested it had been taken about a year ago. Rocco Marchetti is the Don of the Marchetti Familia, the most powerful criminal organization on the East Coast, he said, and each word fell like a bomb in the silence of the office. He's the head of the Italian Mafia in New York, Aurora. He controls trafficking, illegal gambling, extortion. He's a criminal. The world stopped spinning, literally stopped. I could feel my heart beating in my chest, could hear the buzzing of blood in my ears, but everything else was silent, dead, as if someone had pressed pause on reality. No, the word came out automatically, a denial reflex. No, you're mistaken. Rocco couldn't. He can't be. But even as I said it, pieces began to fall into place. The enormous house, the expensive cars, Ivan, who was clearly more than just a driver, with that military posture and those always vigilant eyes. The way people at the restaurant reacted to Rocco, with respect mixed with fear. The calls he received at strange hours, which he always answered away from me, with that low, firm voice that suggested orders being given. "I'm sorry, Aurora," Professor Esposito said, and the genuine compassion in his voice was almost worse than the revelation. "I worked as a forensic consultant for the FBI for 15 years before becoming a professor. I recognized Marchetti that day I saw him with you. I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to decide whether I should tell you or not, but you deserve to know who you're getting involved with." He pulled out more papers, newspaper articles about territorial wars between families, police reports on unsolved homicides where the Marchetti name appeared in the margins as a suspect, photos of Rocco with other men, all wearing expensive suits and carrying that same aura of controlled danger. "He's been arrested 3 times, the professor continued, his voice professional but gentle, as if presenting a case study and not completely destroying my world. Charges of murder, extortion, money laundering. Every time the charges were dropped or he was acquitted due to lack of evidence. Because he's smart, Aurora, very smart, and he has enough resources to ensure he can never be touched legally." My hands were shaking. I picked up one of the photos, studying Rocco's face in it. It was the same face that had smiled at me so tenderly, the same eyes that had looked at me as if I were the most precious thing in the world, the same mouth that had kissed every inch of my skin and murmured promises in Italian. How could he be the same person? How could the gentle man who had cooked for me, who had talked about his mother with tears in his eyes, who had held my hand as if it were made of glass, be a mobster, a criminal, someone who killed people? "Did he hurt you?" the professor asked softly. "Are you in danger?" "No," I answered automatically, and it was true. Rocco had never hurt me, had never even raised his voice at me. He'd always been gentle, considerate, respectful. But how could I trust that memory now? How could I trust anything? "Did he tell you about what he does?" "No." The word came out as a broken whisper. "He said he worked with family business, that it was complicated. I didn't press. I should have pressed." "This isn't your fault, Aurora." Professor Esposito leaned forward, his eyes meeting mine with compassionate intensity. "Men like Marchetti are masters of manipulation. They know exactly what to say, how to act, to make people believe them. You're not the first intelligent person to be fooled by someone like this, and unfortunately you won't be the last. But I should have known. That's what killed me. I studied human behavior. I learned to read signs, to identify lies, to see beyond the masks people wore, and yet I'd let myself be completely fooled. I'd seen only what I wanted to see, had ignored every red flag because I was too in love to question. "What do I do?" I asked, and my voice sounded small, lost, like a frightened child's. "You break up with him, immediately, and you walk away completely. Men like Marchetti are dangerous, Aurora, no matter how charming or kind they seem on the surface. They live in a world of violence and crime, and anyone close to them is at risk." I nodded mechanically, but my mind was elsewhere. It was going back through all the conversations we'd had, all the moments shared, looking for clues I'd missed, looking for the moment where he'd deceived me, where the mask had slipped, where I should have seen the truth. "Thank you for telling me," I managed to say, my voice still shaking. I need to go." I grabbed my books and left the office in a state of shock. My feet carried me automatically across campus, but I wasn't really seeing anything. I was lost in a whirlwind of thoughts, emotions, unanswered questions. My phone rang. It was Rocco. His photo appeared on the screen, the one I'd taken of him smiling in the park, with sunlight making his eyes shine. I looked at it for a long moment, then hung up without answering. He called again, and again, and again. On the 5th call, I answered. "Aurora, thank God." His voice was loaded with relief. "Are you okay? Why didn't you answer? We need to talk." I cut him off, and my voice came out colder than I intended. firmer. Now, there was a pause. What happened? You know what happened. Where are you? At the house. Aurora, what? I'm coming over. And you're going to tell me the truth. The whole truth. I hung up before he could respond. The trip to his mansion was the longest of my life. I took an Uber, a real one this time, and sat in the back seat with clenched fists, trying to control the storm of emotions threatening to consume me. Anger, betrayal, pain, fear, all mixed in a tight knot in my chest that barely let me breathe. Rocco was waiting at the door when I arrived. No jacket, just tailored pants and a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, and the expression on his face when he saw me was pure concern. He took a step toward me, his hands automatically reaching out, but I backed away. Don't touch me, I warned, and the pain that crossed his face when he heard that almost made my resolve waver. Almost. Aurora, please, tell me what happened, he pleaded, and his hands fell to his sides, helpless. Is it true? My voice trembled despite my efforts to keep it steady. Are you Rocco Marchetti? Don of the Marchetti Famiglia, head of the Mafia? A criminal. I saw the exact moment he understood, the moment he realized the secret had been revealed, that the perfect bubble we'd built had burst. His expression went from confusion to comprehension, to something that looked almost like resignation. Who told you? He asked, but his voice was defeated. He already knew the answer, already knew denial was useless. Answer the question, I screamed, and tears began streaming down my face without permission. Is it true? Everything Professor Esposito showed me, the photos, the articles, the murder charges, is it all true? Aurora, I can explain. Answer me! My voice echoed through the enormous hall, breaking completely. Yes, the word came out low, loaded with pain. Yes, it's true. I am the Don of the Marchetti Familia. I control operations that are illegal. I've done things you probably can't even imagine. But Aurora, please, let me explain. You lied! I exploded, and all the emotions I'd been holding back burst out at once. You lied about who you are. About what you do. You let me believe you were just a businessman, someone normal, when really you're a criminal. Do you kill people, Rocco? Tell me, do you kill people? The silence that followed was deafening. He didn't deny it, didn't say no, just looked at me with those dark eyes full of pain and guilt, and that silence was worse than any confession. My God, I whispered, feeling my legs weaken. You kill people, and I slept with you. I fell in love with you. How could you? How could you deceive me like this? I never wanted to deceive you. Rocco took a step forward, and there was desperation in his voice now. In the beginning, I didn't know this would become this. And when I realized I was falling in love with you, I tried to tell you 1,000 times, but I was afraid. I was so afraid of losing you, of seeing this exact look on your face, this look of disgust and betrayal. So, you chose to keep lying, chose to keep me in ignorance while pretending to be someone you're not. I never pretended. His voice rose for the first time, and there was desperate passion in it. Everything I showed you, everything I felt, was real. The person I am when I'm with you, that's who I really am, Aurora. Not the mask, not the Dawn, but the man. You know me better than anyone in this world. I don't know you. I cut him off, and the words came out like knives. I don't know anything about you. The person I thought I knew doesn't exist. It was all lies, all manipulation. No! Rocco closed the distance between us in 2 quick steps, his hands holding my shoulders gently but firmly. It wasn't a lie. My feelings for you, the way you make me feel, the peace you give me, none of that was a lie. I love you, Aurora. For the first time in my life, I love someone more than my own fear, more than my pride. You have to believe that. I pushed him away, sobbing now. How can I believe anything you say? How? Because you know me, he insisted, but didn't try to touch me again. You studied every gesture, every expression. You know when I'm lying. Look at me now and tell me I'm lying about loving you. And that was the cruelest part, because when I looked at him, with my eyes trained in reading body language and micro-expressions, all I saw was sincerity, pain, desperation, love. But I also saw a man who had lied to me for weeks, a man whose hands had blood on them, a man who lived in a world of violence I couldn't even begin to understand. I can't do this, I whispered, backing toward the door. I can't be with someone who does what you do, who is what you are. Aurora, please. No! I screamed when he tried to approach. Don't try to convince me. Don't try to make me stay. Because if you really love me, if anything between us was real, you'll let me go. I saw the struggle happen on his face. The desire to hold me, to convince me, to fight for this. But then something broke in his eyes, and he nodded slowly. If that's what you want, he said, and his voice was broken in a way that made my heart bleed. I respect your decision. I'll always respect your decisions, Aurora. Always. I said nothing more. I didn't trust myself to speak without breaking down completely. I just turned and ran to the door, out of that mansion, away from the man I loved and who had shattered me to pieces. And this time, he didn't come after me. Discovering that the love of your life is in the criminal world, that's a revelation I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Chapter 8.
Let her go.
504 hours since I left Rocco's mansion and felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces on the marble floor of that grand entrance. I'd counted every second, every interminable minute where my body functioned on autopilot, while my mind was stuck in that moment, in that look of absolute pain on his face. When I said I couldn't stay, the apartment was chaos. Bianca had given up trying to make me clean or eat, or do anything besides go to classes and work. I existed, but didn't live. I breathed, but didn't feel. I functioned like a robot programmed to execute basic tasks while my interior was completely destroyed. Aurora, you need to eat something, Bianca said for the 1,000th time, placing a plate with toast in front of me. I was sitting at our tiny table, staring fixedly at a psychology book whose page I hadn't turned in at least an hour. I'm not hungry, I answered automatically, the same words I'd repeated every day since that horrible Tuesday. Bianca sighed, pulling the chair beside me and sitting with that determined expression I knew very well. It was the, now we're going to have a serious conversation whether you want to or not expression. Okay, enough, she declared, closing my book forcefully. You're going to tell me exactly what happened, not the condensed version you gave me while crying that night, the full version. What did Rocco do to leave you like this? He didn't do anything, I whispered, and it was the most painful truth. He never hurt me, Bianca, never was rude to me, never disrespected me, never made me feel unsafe or afraid. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. Then why are you destroyed? Bianca took my hand, squeezing gently. Why did you break up with him if he was so perfect? I took a deep breath, feeling tears burn my eyes again. I'd cried so much in the last few weeks I didn't think I had any tears left. But apparently my body had an infinite supply of them. Because he kills people, Bianca. The words exploded from me, loaded with all the pain and confusion I'd been holding in. He's the head of the Mafia. He controls crimes, trafficking, violence. The hands that touched me so gently, that cooked for me, that held my face as if I were precious, those same hands have blood on them, and I don't. I don't know how to process that, how to reconcile the man I met with the criminal he is. Bianca was silent for a long moment, processing. I could see thoughts passing across her face, the way she was trying to understand, trying to find the right words. Did he tell you this? She finally asked. No, Professor Esposito told me, showed me photos, articles, evidence. And when I confronted Rocco, he admitted everything, didn't deny anything. I wiped the tears with the back of my hand. He said he loves me, that everything between us was real. But how can it be real when he lied about who he is? Aurora, Bianca began, but was interrupted by a loud knock on the door. We frowned, looking at each other. We weren't expecting anyone, and deliveries usually rang the building buzzer. They didn't knock directly on the apartment door. Bianca stood up and went to the door, looking through the peephole. It's a woman, she whispered to me. Blonde, elegant, looks rich. Do you know anyone like that? I shook my head no, my heart accelerating with apprehension. Bianca opened the door cautiously, leaving the security chain fastened. Can I help you? She asked politely. I'm looking for Aurora Valle. The voice that came from the other side was soft, cultivated, the kind of voice that comes from years of diction classes and expensive private schools. I need to talk to her about Rocco Marchetti. My whole body froze. I signaled for Bianca to open the door, and she hesitated only a second before removing the chain. The woman who entered our tiny apartment looked like she'd stepped directly out of a fashion magazine. Tall, blonde, with impeccable skin and clothes that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Sky-high heels, designer bag, and a posture that screamed money and privilege. She looked around the apartment with an expression that tried to be neutral, but clearly registered every detail of our relative poverty. Aurora Valle? She asked, her blue eyes finding mine. Yes, I replied, standing slowly. Who are you? Giorgia Di Berardino, she introduced herself, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Friend of the Marchetti family. May I sit? Bianca and I exchanged glances, but I nodded to the empty chair. Giorgia sat with studied grace, crossing her legs and placing her bag on her lap. Why are you here? I asked directly, having no patience for social games. Because Rocco has been different since you two broke up, she said, and there was something in her tone I couldn't identify. And I thought you should know some things about him, things I'm sure he didn't tell you. I already know enough, I replied coldly. I know he's a criminal, that he runs the Mafia, that he— You don't know anything, Giorgia interrupted me, and now there was a thread of steel in her soft voice. You knew Rocco for a few weeks. I've known him for years, Aurora, and I can tell you that the man you think you know isn't real. I felt my stomach tighten. What do you mean? Georgia leaned forward, her blue eyes fixed on mine. Rocco Marchetti is one of the most dangerous men on the East Coast. He's not just the head of the Mafia. He's brutal, ruthless. I've seen him order executions of people who disrespected him. I've seen him torture informants who tried to betray him. He has no conscience, Aurora. No remorse. Her words were like knives, each one cutting deeper. But something about the way she spoke, the almost imperceptible satisfaction in her eyes when she saw my reaction, made my psychologist instinct sound alarms. I saw the way he looks at you in the photos, Georgia continued, pulling her phone from her bag and showing me images that had clearly been taken without our knowledge. Rocco and me in the park, laughing, at the restaurant, leaning toward each other, in front of the college, him touching my face. He's good at this, you know, at making women think they're special, that they're different from the others. I am different. The words came out before I could stop them. Georgia laughed, and the sound was icy. They all thought the same thing. You think you're the first? Please. Rocco has a new woman every few months. He gets bored quickly, Aurora. You were just another diversion, a distraction from his violent world. And when he got tired of you, as he always does, you would have been discarded like all the others. Get out. Bianca stood up abruptly, her voice cutting. Now. Georgia stood gracefully, smoothing her skirt. I just came to give a friendly warning. You made the right choice breaking up with him, Aurora. Men like Rocco Marchetti destroy everything they touch. It's better you found out now before it was too late. She walked to the door but stopped in the doorway, turning to give me one last look. And just so you know, he's already dating other people. Life goes on for him. It always does. The door closed behind her, and I collapsed back into the chair. Bianca was at my side instantly, her arms around me while I sobbed. Don't believe her, Bianca whispered fiercely. Aurora, that woman is poisonous. Everything she said was to hurt you. But what if it's true? I whimpered. What if I really was just another one? What if he's already forgotten about me while I'm here dying inside? Then why does he call every day? Why does he send messages you don't answer? Why has Ivan shown up here 3 times asking you to talk to him? Bianca held me by the shoulders, forcing me to look at her. That's not the behavior of someone who's moved on, Aurora. I wanted to believe her, desperately wanted to believe. But George's words had planted seeds of doubt that grew like weeds in the already devastated garden of my heart. What I didn't know was that on the other side of the city, in a dark office overlooking the illuminated skyline, Rocco Marchetti was sitting alone, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the desk in front of him, and red eyes that hadn't seen adequate sleep in weeks. Ivan was at the door, watching his boss with growing concern. He'd seen Rocco go through territorial wars, betrayals, devastating losses, but he'd never seen him like this, so completely destroyed. Dawn, Ivan said softly, you need to rest. She won't answer my calls, Rocco said, his voice hoarse from disuse. Won't respond to messages. It's like I ceased to exist for her. She needs time. What if time isn't enough? What if I've lost her forever, Ivan? The driver had no answer for that. He just watched as his boss, the most powerful man he knew, slowly fell apart for love of a psychology student who had gotten into the wrong car and changed everything. Chapter 9.
Choose who you are.
I spent the entire night awake after Georgia left, my mind spinning in endless circles. Every word she'd said, every poisonous insinuation, every seed of doubt she'd planted. But the more I thought about it, the more something didn't fit. And finally, at 4 a.m, when the sky was beginning to lighten, I realized what it was. I was a psychology student. I'd spent years learning to read people, to identify manipulation, to separate truth from lies, and everything about Georgia screamed manipulation, the way she'd chosen each word carefully, measuring my reaction, the barely hidden satisfaction in her eyes when she saw me suffer, the perfect timing of each revelation calculated to cause maximum pain. I grabbed my notebook, the one I used for class notes, and started writing. It was an exercise I learned in clinical psychology. When your emotions are too intense, externalize them, put them on paper, analyze objectively. Evidence of genuine manipulation versus real vulnerability. I started listing moments with Rocco, analyzing each one through the lens of my training. When he'd tried to ask me to stay that first night and was completely speechless, stuttering like a nervous teenager. That wasn't the behavior of an experienced manipulator. Manipulators are smooth, always know what to say. He'd been genuinely vulnerable, genuinely shy, the way he'd talked about his mother, with tears in his eyes and a broken voice. I'd studied enough about body language to know when someone was faking emotion. His pain was real. The loss was real. The way his hands trembled slightly when he touched the onions he was cutting, remembering her lessons. Kohlberg's theory of moral development. People aren't simply good or bad. There are layers, contexts, reasons. Someone can do terrible things and still be capable of genuine love, of kindness, of change. I wrote that in the notebook, underlined it twice. That was the crux of the matter, wasn't it? I'd been trained to see human complexity, to understand that people are multifaceted. But when it came to Rocco, I'd fallen into the trap of binary thinking. Criminal, bad, bad, incapable of true love. But was it really that simple? I remembered a case we studied in forensic psychology, a man who had grown up in an organized crime family, who had been conditioned from childhood to see violence as a solution, who had never known another path. That didn't justify his actions, but it provided context, and context mattered in psychology. My phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. I opened it and felt my stomach sink. It was Georgia again. This time, they were links to articles about specific cases. A man found dead in the Hudson River. Connections to Marchetti territory. A witness who had disappeared before being able to testify against the organization. A warehouse fire that killed 3 people, suspected of being orchestrated. Still think he's the gentleman you met? This is who Rocco Marchetti really is. I looked at the evidence, feeling nausea rise in my throat, but then I forced my mind to work clinically, analytically. Georgia was escalating her efforts. Why? If Rocco had really already moved on, if I really was just another disposable distraction, why was Georgia so invested in ensuring I stayed away from him? Hypothesis. Georgia wants Rocco for herself. Her obsession isn't about protecting me, it's about eliminating competition. I wrote that in the notebook too, and the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The way she'd talked about him with such familiarity. I've known him for years. The way her eyes shone when she said his name. The satisfaction when she saw my pain. She wasn't warning me. She was pushing me away. But that didn't change the facts. Rocco was who he was. Did what he did. The evidence was real, even if Georgia's motives were questionable. The question was, had he shown real vulnerability with me? Or had I only seen what I wanted to see? I closed my eyes, forcing my mind to revisit each interaction with brutal honesty. The first night, when he took me home instead of waking me up and sending me away. No strategic gain in that, just impulsive kindness. The dinner, where he went without his phone for the first time in years, according to Signora Maria. The genuine shyness when he tried to ask me to come back. The way he cooked for me, sharing painful memories of his mother. Preliminary conclusion. The vulnerability seemed genuine. But genuine vulnerability doesn't cancel out criminal actions. So the real question wasn't whether he loved me. The question was, could I love someone whose hands had blood on them? Could I accept his moral complexity? Or did I need someone perfectly good? And honestly, I didn't know the answer. 3 days later, I received another package from Georgia. This time they were surveillance photos, copies of police reports, evidence she clearly had access to through her connections, and each piece was more brutal than the last. I looked at everything, forcing myself not to look away. If I was going to make a decision about Rocco, it needed to be with completely open eyes. I couldn't hide from the truth of what he was, what he did. That's when I realized I was processing secondhand information. I was letting other people, Professor Esposito, Georgia, define who Rocco was for me. And as a future psychologist, I knew that was a critical methodological flaw. If I wanted the truth, I needed to go straight to the source. I picked up my phone with trembling hands and typed the message before I could regret it. I need to talk to you. I want the truth. All of it. No filters. No omissions. You owe me that. The response came in seconds. Whenever and wherever you want. I'll tell you everything, Aurora. Absolutely everything. 2 hours later, I was back at that mansion. But this time there was no romance in the air. No nervous anticipation. Just a cold determination to finally hear the whole truth. Rocco was waiting for me in the living room, and the shock of seeing him again almost knocked me down. He looked devastated. Too thin. Deep dark circles under his eyes. Stubble more careless than usual. As if he hadn't slept or eaten properly in weeks. That made something in my chest tighten painfully, but I forced myself to maintain focus. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice hoarse. "I wasn't sure you would." "I want the truth," I replied, remaining standing even when he gestured to the sofa. "All of it. Start with your family. Who are the Marchettis?" Rocco took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff, and then he started talking. He told me everything. About how the Marchetti family had controlled the Italian Mafia in New York for 3 generations. About how he'd been raised in that world, where violence was language and power was survival. About his father, who had trained him from childhood to take over the family business, who saw emotion as weakness and compassion as fatal flaw. "I killed for the first time when I was 17, he said, and his hands trembled. "It was a test from my father, to prove I was worthy of leading. And I did it, Aurora. I pulled the trigger because it was expected of me, because it was my destiny, because I didn't know another path." I felt bile rise in my throat, but I didn't look away. "How many?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How many people have you killed? Directly? 6. Indirectly, through orders? More than 20. He didn't lie, didn't soften it, just confessed with brutal honesty. And I can't undo it, Aurora. I can't bring those people back. I carry the weight of them every day. Do you feel remorse?" I pressed, my psychologist voice taking over. Or is it just guilt about consequences? His eyes met mine, and there was deep pain in them. In the beginning, it was numbness. I trained myself not to feel, because feeling was weakness. But over the years, yes, I feel remorse, especially for those who didn't deserve it, for those who were just pawns in bigger games. And the business, trafficking, extortion, everything Georgia told me, true, all true. I control territories, illegal businesses, people. I have blood on my hands, Aurora, literally and metaphorically. I closed my eyes, processing. It was one thing to know abstractly, something completely different to hear it from him, without filters, without excuses. Why did you tell me everything now? I finally asked. Why not before? Because I was afraid of losing you, he admitted, and his voice broke. And I lost you anyway. But you deserve the complete truth, even if it means you hate me forever. I don't hate you. The words came out before I could stop them. I wanted to hate you. It would be easier, but I can't. Rocco took a step toward me, hopeful. Aurora, but I also don't know if I can be with you, I continued, and tears started falling. How do I reconcile the man who cooked for me, who was shy and gentle, with the man who kills people? How do I live with that? You don't have to, he said softly. I won't ask you to accept what I am, but I want you to know one thing. With you, Aurora, I was just a man, not the Don, not the criminal, just Rocco. You made me feel human again after years of being just a function, a role. People don't change, I began. I can't change my past, he interrupted me, but I can change my future. For you, I would change everything. Leave the business. Walk away from the violence. Find another path. Because you showed me there is another path, Aurora. You showed me I can be more than just what my father made me. And there it was. The impossible offer. The promise I desperately wanted to believe. But I still didn't know if I could. Chapter 10.
Sometimes destiny chooses us.
I left the mansion without giving Rocco an answer. I needed time, space, air to think. He didn't try to stop me, just watched me go with those dark eyes full of pain and cautious hope. Ivan drove me home in silence, respecting my need for quiet. But in the following days, I noticed something strange. Men in black cars parked near my college. Unfamiliar faces appearing in the same places I was, always keeping their distance, but always present. At first I thought I was being paranoid, but my instinct insisted something was wrong. It was on a Thursday, leaving the library at night, that everything exploded. It was dark, the parking lot practically empty. I'd stayed late studying, reviewing material for final exams. My footsteps echoed on the concrete as I walked toward the bus stop, my backpack heavy on my shoulders. Aurora Vale? A male voice came from the shadows. I turned and saw 3 men approaching. I didn't recognize any of them, but the way they moved, with predatory intent, made every alarm in my body go off. Who wants to know? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady while my hand searched for the pepper spray in my bag. Someone who wants to give you a message, the one who seemed to be the leader said, and there was something cruel in his smile. You should have stayed away from Rocco Marchetti when you had the chance. My blood ran cold. Before I could react, they advanced. I managed to pull out the pepper spray, hitting one of them in the eyes, but the other 2 were fast. Rough hands grabbed me, and I went into complete panic, screaming and struggling. That's when I heard the roar of an engine. Tires screeched on the asphalt. A car door opened violently, and suddenly there was another presence there. A presence that radiated absolute and controlled fury. Rocco. He moved like a storm. Fast, brutal, efficient. The first man holding me was ripped away and thrown against a car with force that dented the hood. The second tried to pull a gun, but Rocco was faster, breaking his wrist with a precise movement that made the man scream. In less than 30 seconds, all 3 were on the ground, groaning in pain, and Rocco was in front of me, his hands checking my face, my arms, searching for injuries. Are you okay? Did they hurt you? Aurora, talk to me. His voice was desperate, hands trembling slightly as he touched me. I'm fine, I managed to say, still in shock. How did you know I was here? Rocco hesitated, guilt crossing his features. I kept protection on you, since we broke up. Discreet men, at a distance, just to make sure you were safe. When they saw these guys approaching, they alerted me immediately. You were watching me? I should be furious, but all I could feel was a strange mixture of relief and something warmer, deeper. Protecting, he corrected softly. I never stopped protecting you, Aurora. Even when you hated me, even when you wanted nothing to do with me, I needed to know you were safe. Before I could respond, one of the men on the ground laughed, spitting blood. She doesn't know, does she? Who sent us? Rocco turned to him with deadly speed, grabbing him by the collar and lifting him off the ground as if he weighed nothing, and the expression on his face was terrifying. It was the Dawn I'd never seen, cold and absolutely ruthless. Who sent you? The voice was low, dangerous, loaded with the promise of violence. The blonde, the man stammered, genuine fear in his eyes. Georgia something. Paid us to scare the girl, make her think being near you was dangerous. Rocco's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles pulsing. He dropped the man, who fell to the ground with a groan, and pulled out his phone. "Ivan, I want Giorgia Di Berardino found and brought to me. Now." The voice was pure ice. "And send a cleanup crew to the university parking lot. We have trash to dispose of." He hung up and turned to me, and I saw the struggle happening on his face. The brutal Don fighting against the gentle man I knew, trying to control himself, trying not to scare me even more. "Aurora, I need to deal with this," he said, and there was a darkness in his voice that made my skin crawl. "I need to deal with Giorgia, but first, I'm taking you home, to somewhere safe." "What are you going to do to her?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Nothing you need to witness," he replied, and the way he said it, the finality in those words, made it clear that Giorgia had crossed a line from which there was no return. He guided me to the car, his hand firm and protective on my back. But before getting in, I turned to look at him, to really see him. The man who had just neutralized 3 attackers with brutal efficiency. The man whose eyes still looked at me with absolute tenderness, despite the violence he just exercised. "Rocco," I whispered, "thank you for protecting me, for being here." Something broke in his expression. He pulled my face between his hands, resting his forehead against mine. "Always," he promised, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I'll always protect you, Aurora. It doesn't matter if you hate me, if you don't want to see me, if you never forgive me. No one touches you. No one." And there, in that dark parking lot, surrounded by evidence of his violence, but also the fierce protection he offered, I finally understood. Rocco Marchetti was dangerous, brutal, a man with blood on his hands. But he was also the man who had watched over me even when I'd sent him away, who had put my safety above his own pride. He was complex, contradictory, imperfect in terrifying ways, but he was mine, and I finally knew what I wanted. Chapter 11.
No more secrets.
Rocco took me to his mansion, not to my apartment. When I started to protest, he simply said it was safer there, that he had armed security, that he needed to know I was protected while he dealt with Giorgia. And honestly, after the attack, I didn't have the energy to argue. Signora Maria was waiting when we arrived, her eyes wide with concern when she saw my disheveled state, the tear in my blouse sleeve where one of the men had grabbed me. She enveloped me in a maternal hug immediately, murmuring things in Italian I didn't understand, but that sounded like comfort and protection. "Take care of her," Rocco instructed, and his voice was tense, controlled in a way that suggested barely contained violence. "Don't let anyone in, no one but me or Ivan." "Where are you going?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. To settle this, his eyes met mine, dark and determined. "Giorgia crossed a line, and I'm going to make sure she never, ever comes near you again." There was a promise in those words, a promise of violence I should fear, but that instead made me feel strangely safe, protected in a way I'd never experienced before. 2 hours later, I heard voices coming from somewhere in the house, loud, tense voices, one of them definitely female. Giorgia. Rocco had brought her here. Against my better judgment, I left the room Signora Maria had installed me in, and followed the sounds. I found myself in a hallway leading to a huge office, the door cracked open enough for me to see and hear without being seen. Giorgia was there, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely scared. Rocco was in front of her, leaning against the desk with that relaxed posture I'd learned to recognize as dangerous. Ivan was leaning against the door, blocking any exit. "You hired men to attack Aurora," Rocco said, and his voice was ice cold in a way that made my skin crawl. "You orchestrated an attack on the woman I love. Give me a reason, Giorgia. One single reason why I shouldn't make you disappear tonight. I did it for you," Giorgia practically screamed, and there was desperation in her voice now. "That girl isn't from our world, Rocco. She's poor, insignificant, a nobody who's going to destroy you. I've known you for years. I understand your life. I could give you give me nothing." Rocco interrupted, and there was absolute contempt in his voice. "You're obsessed, pathetic, and you just signed your death sentence by touching her." I saw Giorgia pale, her eyes widening with genuine fear. "You can't kill me. My family has connections, influence. Your family will receive a body and a message," Rocco said calmly. "The message being, control your members, or they'll keep disappearing." That's when I walked in. I didn't plan it, didn't think, just pushed the door open and entered that office before Rocco could do something he couldn't undo. "Aurora," he began, surprise crossing his features. "No," I cut him off, walking until I stood between him and Giorgia. "Don't kill her, Rocco. Not for me. She tried to hurt you." His voice was tense, fighting for control. "And she failed, because you were there, because you protected me." I placed my hand on his chest, feeling his heart beating fast under my palm. "But if you kill her now, for me, I carry that weight, and I can't be the reason you add another name to the list." I saw the struggle happen on his face, the Don who wanted to eliminate the threat, versus the man who wanted to give me what I was asking. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he nodded slowly. "Leave New York," he said to Georgia, without taking his eyes off me. "Tonight, and never come back. If I see you in this city again, if I hear your name near Aurora, nothing will stop me. Understood?" Georgia nodded frantically, already running to the door Ivan had opened. She disappeared into the hallway, and we heard her high heels echoing as she fled. When we were alone, Rocco pulled me into his arms, holding me as if I might disappear at any second. I allowed myself to stay there, absorbing his warmth, the familiar scent, the feeling of absolute safety that only existed when I was near him. "You asked me not to kill her," he murmured against my hair. "No one's ever asked me to show mercy before, because I choose to know the man, not just the Don," I replied, pulling back enough to look into his eyes. "I can handle the truth, Rocco. I can handle who you were, what you did, but I can't handle lies. I can't handle secrets." "No secrets," he promised immediately. "Never again. Total transparency, Aurora. You'll know everything. And I have conditions," I continued, my voice getting firmer. "If we're going to do this, if I'm really going to be with you, there need to be boundaries. I don't get involved in the work. Ever. You don't bring it near me." "Agreed. Completely." He took my face between his hands, his eyes intense on mine. "I'll protect you from that world, Aurora. You'll never have to witness it, never have to carry the weight of what I do. And you need to consider getting out," I added softly. "Eventually. Not today. Not tomorrow, but you talked about changing. I need to know you're really going to try." "I'll do more than try," he promised, and the sincerity in those words was impossible to question. "For you, I'll find another way. It may take time, it may be complicated to extricate myself, but I'll do it." I nodded, feeling tears burn my eyes. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief, of cautious hope, of finally accepting the complexity of what we were building. The next day, I went to talk to Professor Esposito. He deserved to know my decision, especially after trying to protect me with his revelations. I found him in his office, surrounded by the same books on criminology and psychological profiles. When I told him about my choice to give Rocco a second chance, I expected judgment, maybe disappointment. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, studying my face carefully. "Have you analyzed this completely?" he asked. "It's not just emotion talking. I analyzed it for weeks," I replied honestly. "And yes, there's emotion, but there's also logic. People can change, Professor. You taught that yourself. When they have the right motivation, when they have strong enough reasons, behaviors can be modified." A small smile touched his lips. "You paid attention in my classes. I always do." I took a deep breath. "Rocco isn't just the Don. He's layers, contradictions, potential for change. And I choose to believe in that potential." Professor Esposito nodded slowly. "Just be careful, Aurora. And if he ever hurts you, if he crosses the lines you've established, you leave." Without hesitation, I agreed. That night, Rocco picked me up at college. Not in one of the luxury cars, but in the black car. That same car where it all began. I got into the back seat and he was there, waiting with that small smile I'd learned to love. Ivan started driving, and I realized we weren't going anywhere specific, just driving through the illuminated city. "You're still my favorite case study," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Did you know that?" Rocco laughed, that low, genuine laugh. "I always knew. You never stopped analyzing me, not for a second, and you never stopped surprising me." I took his hand, intertwining our fingers. "Rocco Marchetti, you're the most complex, contradictory, and impossible person I've ever met. Is that a compliment? It's the truth." I turned to face him completely. "And I love you, even with all the baggage, all the darkness, all the danger. I love you." His eyes widened, pure vulnerability crossing his features. "Aurora, I love you," I repeated, firmer now. "In the wrong car, at the wrong time, with the most complicated person possible, but I love you. I love you," he replied, his voice broken with emotion. "More than anything in this world, you saved me, Aurora. You made me human again." And then he kissed me, there in the back seat of that black car where it all began, and it was perfect. Imperfect and perfect at the same time, like us. Chapter 12.
I chose this path.
2 years later, the sign on the door read, Aurora Valle Marchetti, Family and Couples Therapy. It still made my chest tighten every time I looked at it, that mixture of pride and disbelief that I'd actually made it. Graduated, licensed, working in the field I'd always dreamed of. Rocco had insisted on paying for an elegant office downtown, but I refused. Instead, I set up my practice at home, in one of the enormous rooms of the mansion that was now officially ours. It was perfect, private, comfortable, and allowed me to maintain that crucial separation between my work and his, because he really was changing, slowly, carefully, but changing. Over the last 2 years, he'd gradually transferred the more violent operations to other family members, focusing only on businesses that could be legitimized. It wasn't an overnight transformation, and it would probably take a few more years until he was completely out, but he was trying. For me, for us, for who he wanted to become. Still analyzing, his voice came from the office doorway, that amused tone I knew so well. I turned and found him leaning against the frame, wearing jeans and a simple shirt. No suit, no Dawn's armor, just Rocco, my husband, with that small smile that still made my heart race. Always, I replied, closing my latest patient's file. You're my lifelong case study. He entered the office, pulling me from the chair and wrapping me in his arms. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady beats of the heart that I once thought was made of ice, but discovered was made of flesh, blood, and a capacity for love that surprised me every day. You humanized me, he murmured against my hair, repeating the words he'd said in our wedding vows 6 months ago. And you taught me that strength isn't about perfection, I replied, completing the ritual we'd created. It's about choosing to fight for what matters. The wedding had been simple, exactly as I wanted. Small ceremony in the mansion gardens, only close people. Bianca as my maid of honor, radiant and crying with happiness while holding the rings. Ivan as Rocco's best man, smiling that rare smile as he watched the man he'd served for years finally find peace. The vows had been written by us. No ready-made phrases, no empty cliches, just raw, honest truth. I got into the wrong car, I had said, tears flowing freely down my face, and found the right life. I found you when I wasn't looking, loved you when I shouldn't have, chose you when everyone said to run, and I'd do it all again, 1,000 times. You woke me up when I didn't even know I was sleeping, Rocco had responded, his voice broken with emotion. I spent years existing without living, functioning without feeling, and then you appeared, messy and exhausted, sleeping on my shoulder, and suddenly I was breathing again, living again. Senora Maria had cried so much she needed 3 handkerchiefs. Even Ivan had been visibly moved, discreetly wiping his eyes when he thought no one was watching. A noise from the living room brought me back to the present. Rocco and I exchanged glances and walked together to investigate. We found Senora Maria holding a girl of maybe 4 by the hand. The child had messy dark hair and huge eyes wide with fear, clutching a worn teddy bear as if it were the only familiar thing in a strange world. She was lost near the gates, Senora Maria explained gently. She said she got into the wrong car and ended up here by mistake. My eyes met Rocco's, and I saw the same astonishment and humor reflected in them. Got into the wrong car. Of course she did. I knelt in front of the girl, maintaining respectful distance. Hi, sweetie. What's your name? Sophia, she whispered, clutching the teddy bear tighter. Sophia, I'm going to call your parents and they'll come get you, okay? In the meantime, want a snack? Senora Maria makes the best cookies in the world. Her eyes lit up slightly, and she nodded. Rocco watched the scene with an expression I couldn't completely decipher, but there was tenderness there, and something that looked a lot like hope. After Sophia's parents arrived, relieved and grateful, and took their daughter home, Rocco pulled me close on the terrace overlooking the garden. One day, he said softly, maybe we'll have our own child getting into the wrong cars. I smiled, resting my head on his shoulder, the same shoulder I'd slept on that first night, when my life had completely changed without me knowing. Your children will definitely be troublemakers, I teased. And analytical like you, he countered, kissing my hair. Poor us. Do you still think it was worth it? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. All the complications, all the pain, all the process of change. Rocco turned me to face him, those dark eyes that once scared me now full only of absolute love. Aurora, you got into my car by mistake and completely changed my life. It was worth every second, every tear, every difficulty, because it led me here, to you, to us. And there, on the terrace of that mansion that was now our home, with the sun setting over the city and the future opening before us full of imperfect but real possibilities, I knew with absolute certainty. Sometimes, getting into the wrong car takes you exactly where you're supposed to be. Final reflection. The wrong car and the right destiny. There's a cruel and beautiful irony in the concept of mistakes that lead us exactly where we should be. Aurora Valle got into the wrong car that Tuesday night, exhausted and lost in her own survival. A simple mistake. A mix-up of a few numbers on the license plate, of one black sedan among so many others. But that mistake became the most important decision of her life, even without really being a decision. This makes us question, does destiny exist? Or are we just creatures stumbling in the dark, calling our accidents purpose when they work out? Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. Maybe destiny isn't about predetermined paths, but about recognizing the doors that open in our mistakes and having the courage to walk through them. Aurora could have woken up in that car, fled terrified, and never looked back. Rocco could have expelled her immediately, kept his defenses intact, continued being just the heartless Don the world believed him to be. But they didn't do that. And that's the real magic of the story. Because love isn't about finding the perfect person. It's about finding the imperfect person and choosing to see them completely. See not just the light, but also the darkness. Not just the kindness, but also the danger. And still choosing to stay, choosing to fight, choosing to believe that people are more than their worst moments. Rocco Marchetti had blood on his hands. That's not romanticized, not excused, not forgotten. Aurora never pretended that the hands that touched her tenderly were clean. But she chose to see the whole man. The boy forced to become a monster. The son who cooked with his mother. The man capable of shyness and vulnerability, even after years using violence as language. And Rocco loved her not despite her simplicity, but because of it. Because she was real when everything in his life was a transaction. Because she questioned when everyone else just obeyed. Because she saw possibilities in him that he'd forgotten existed. Their story isn't a traditional fairy tale. It's something deeper, truer, more frighteningly human. It's about second chances not as erasure of the past, but as a conscious choice to build a different future. It's about transformation, not as instant magic, but as daily, constant, painful work of becoming better. It's about accepting that loving someone complicated means embracing complexity. It means establishing clear boundaries while keeping your heart open. It means demanding true change, not empty promises. It means being willing to see the contradictions in someone and loving them not despite them, but including them. In the end, Aurora and Rocco prove something fundamental about the human condition. No one is beyond redemption if there's someone willing to believe in the possibility of change. And no one is so lost that the right love, at the right time, can't begin to heal them. So maybe mistakes aren't really mistakes. Maybe they're just the universe pushing us toward conversations we needed to have, people we needed to meet, versions of ourselves we needed to become. Sometimes the wrong car takes you exactly home, and sometimes home is a person you never expected to find. And if you want to check out another video full of love and destiny, click on the video that appears on your screen now.